Hi guys, here is our lesson 10.6 on solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. So we're going to work through this lesson today. You should get the printed out notes from the substitute, and I will guide you through this on YouTube. So we're going to start with our warm-up question. Let me switch hands here. We need to solve the quadratic by factoring. So here's our quadratic. Remember, in order to solve by factoring, it must first equal 0. So we have to equal 0 first. So we're going to move this 6x over. So there's our equation. So I wrote it in standard form. Now I'm going to factor this, and since it has the x squared, I can do x times x. And I want to multiply to get 9, but add to get -6. So the numbers that multiply to give me 9 are 1 and 9, and 3 and 3. So to add to give me 6 would be 3 and 3, but in order to make it negative, they both have to be negative. So I actually have the same factors twice, so I only have one part of the equation to solve. So this is a problem that only has one solution. It's just going to be 3. Just the one answer. So hopefully that went okay. Again, with the video, remember that you guys can pause as needed and make sure that you are comfortable with what you just did and make sure you have it all written down. We're talking about something called the quadratic formula now. So rather than using factoring, sometimes we might want to use this formula. And so this formula works every time. So that's why we like the quadratic formula so much. So again, it has to equal 0. So it has to equal 0. And then in order to find our x values, we're going to use this formula. Now make sure you guys write this down correctly. So it's x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. There's actually a song online, so you could go on YouTube and Google the quadratic formula song, and there'd be a song that would be sung. I can even sing for you. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So you can Google that, and there's tons of different people singing a quadratic formula song. So it's a really important formula. It works all the time. So we can use it for any equations where sometimes factoring doesn't work, sometimes square roots don't work, sometimes graphing doesn't work very well, so it works for all types of equations. So again, we're going to use this formula to solve this using the quadratic formula. So the first thing is it needs to equal 0, because it needs to equal 0. So that's step 1. So the equation must equal 0. The next step is I'd suggest you list the a, b, and c. So we're going to list a, b, and c from the equation. So we're going to make this equal 0 first, and then we're going to list our a, b, and c. So I'm going to move this 35 over, just like we did in the warm-up. And I'm going to list what a, b, and c are. So a is what's in front of the x squared, which is a 1 in this case. B is in what's in front of the x, so that's a -2. And then c is a -35. So now I'm ready to put that into this big formula. And again, I'm just using these numbers. I'm not using the x's at all anymore because that's what the x is going to equal. So we're going to put it into the formula now. Put that into our big new formula that we have written up here. And this is a formula eventually you're going to have to memorize, so you're going to want to know this. So x equals the opposite of b. So whatever b was, is negative 2, it's going to go positive 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared, minus 4 times a times c. Oops, that's a 35. And this is all underneath the square root, and they were all over 2 times a. So check and see what I did here. I put this all into our formula. And now we're actually going to do the math that goes with that. So we have to follow order of operations. So we're going to do underneath the square root first. So we're going to work underneath the square root. So we're going to do underneath the square root first. So I'm going to do negative 2 squared. So negative 2 squared is a positive 4 minus 4 times 1 times a negative 35. Negative negatives can become a positive. 4 times 35 is, I believe, 140. And this is all over 2 times 1, which is 2. Sorry, my dog sees another dog outside, so she is whining. And then I'm just going to add 4 and 140. Again, feel free to pause as needed. So now we're ready to take the square root. So we're going to do this whole top. So now we're going to take the square root, but we have to remember we have the positive and negative square root. So that's where that plus and minus comes in. So we're going to take the square root of 144, which is 12. Square root of 144 is 12. And then we're going to basically set up 2 equations now. So I'm going to do 2 plus 12 divided by 2 and 2 minus 12 divided by 2. And we're going to simplify. Again, we're going to do the tops and then we're going to divide because this is like a grouping symbol. It's going to be 14 over 2, it's going to be negative 10 over 2, and so this is going to be 7 and a negative 5. Simplify. Now the answers don't always work out this nicely. This one happens to work really, really nicely, and they won't always work that way, but we will do a couple that work out nicely like this or pretty nicely. Most of the ones I will give you will work really well. So if you want to flip the page over, again, pause is needed. I'm going to do 3 more examples. So again, solving using the quadratic formula. So I'm going to write out the quadratic formula so I have it on this side of the paper. The more times you write this, the more you'll get to know it by heart. But remember, I need this to equal 0 first. So I'm going to make that equal 0. So I'm going to move this 9 over. So again, my A is 2. My B is 7, my C is negative 9. So my A, B, and C. So I listed those out. That's going to allow me to put this all into our formula. So opposite of B, so negative 7 plus or minus 7 squared minus 4 times A times C over 2 times A. We're going to do what's underneath the square root. So 7 squared is 49. Again, a negative negative is to become a positive. 4 times 2 times 9. So that's 8 times 9, which is 72 all over 4. I believe when we add these together, we're going to get 121. Strangely enough, that's also a perfect square. So I have negative 7 plus or minus 11 all over 4. So again, I'm going to set up my two equations. So I'm doing negative 7 plus 11 and negative 7 minus 11. So this is going to be 4 over 4, which is just 1. Works out really nicely. This one's a negative 18 over 4, which I'm just going to simplify. Divide them both by 2. So a negative 9 over 2, or negative 4.5. So again, it worked out pretty nice, but not perfect numbers, but that's okay. So just understanding that we're going to use the same process. All right, we'll do 2 more examples with quadratic formula. Hopefully you guys are kind of getting the hang of it. Bring questions next class. I totally understand if you have questions. I know it's hard to do notes online. So this one I'm making equal 0 again. So my A is 5, my B is 30, my C is 45. Now guys, this replaces, I mean, we can do this instead of factoring. You have to still know how to factor, but this will do the same thing factoring would. So we can bring this formula down. So hopefully opposite of B plus or minus B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. Might have an issue with this one. I might need a calculator and I don't have one handy. So negative 30 plus or minus 30 squared is going to be 900. Right. Minus 45 times 20. So that's, oh, this actually works out really nicely. That's also 900 all over 10. So 900 minus 900 is 0. Square root of 0. Square root of 0 is just 0. So plus or minus 0, we don't really need to do, because you don't add 0, subtract 0, it doesn't change. So this answer, actually, we end up with just one answer, just negative 3. And if you go back to the warm-up questions, kind of similar to that, where you just get the one solution. All right, last question here. Now this one already equals 0 for us, so that's really nice of them. And again, we're going to use our big quadratic formula here. I'm going to write it so I have it in front of me. And then, so again, here's my A, B, and C. So A is 4, B is negative 3, and C is 5. So again, putting this all into my formula, opposite of B, so positive 3, B squared, minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. And I know I'm filling in that really fast, but you'll get better at it. You'll get quicker at it as well. So now we're going to do what's underneath the square root. Negative 3 squared is 9. 4 times 4 times 5. 4 times 5 is 20, times 4 is 80, sorry. All over 8. Now I do need to do 9 minus 80, which is a negative 72. Do you guys remember what we did with a negative square root? Your calculator is going to freak out on you. It's going to say it doesn't work. So that is not something that works for us. So we have to say this is going to be no solution, because we can't take the square root of a negative. So you get to just stop here. I'll warn you guys, there aren't many like this in our homework, if there's any at all. So feel free to go back through anything you guys need to. Homework is listed here. You guys have this sheet. This will be due next time we see each other. So hope everything goes well. Bring questions if you have it. Stop into AR if you need to. Sorry I had to be gone, but hopefully this went okay and you guys are able to complete some of the homework. Take care, have a good day and a good weekend.